Good evening. So tonight we've got a very special guest. When I was reading through some of the stuff that Roddy's done, I was like, wow. Um, to do that as a normal person without type one is amazing. But some of the stuff that Roddy's done with type one, I was almost a little bit taken away. So I'm really excited to hear some of the things that Roddy's done and how he navigated it and really get stuck into some of the stuff that I really see as a massive accomplishment and a challenge for anyone, really. So, yeah, welcome to the call, Roddy.
Hey, thanks very much for having me.
I know you're very welcome. So, I always like to structure these calls starting off with the most obvious thing, I think, as a type one, and that's your diagnosis story. So, if you can tell us a little, because I know it's a little bit different to sort of maybe the more the what would be, well, maybe not anymore, but yeah, no, it's a little bit different, isn't it? So yeah, if you could touch on that, that'd be great.
Yeah, so in 2008, my wife was heavily pregnant with our youngest boy, Finley. So I had severe weight loss. I lost nearly 3 stone in 12 weeks, and she got really concerned because of being heavily pregnant. So she did a wee bit of research online, and it looked like it could be type 1 diabetes because I had the unquenchable thirst, I had the constantly going to the toilet, and I had blurred vision as well. So she, as I say, did a bit of research and ordered a home self testing kit for type 1 diabetes. And that arrived on the Monday. So I did the test and it looked like, yes, you've got type 1 diabetes. But I had a dilemma because that Wednesday I had a ticket for the UEFA Cup final in Manchester to see Glasgow Rangers take on St Petersburg. And I knew if I went to the doctor, there's no way he would allow me to go to the cup final. So I decided to wing it and go to the cup final. I didn't enjoy the cup final, not just because Rangers got beat. I didn't enjoy it just because I was tired and lethargic with the symptoms leading up to being diagnosed. So I made an appointment for the day after the cup final, went to the doctor. He sent me to Rigmore Hospital and was diagnosed the same week as Finley was born.
Wow. So what the one thing I'm taking from that is you really must love Rangers.
Yes.
Oh right. And can you remember what your blood sugar when you did the fingerprint? Can you remember what your blood sugar was? Was it like off the scale or?
When I was in hospital and they did the test, the diabetic specialist doctor came through and said that the reading that I had was a very special reading, and he thinks it was just the fitness that stopped me going into diabetic coma. I was at 45.6.
Nice, nice, not nice. And you was what age was you? Am I right in saying you it wasn't that you wasn't the
I
normal?
was
You wasn't you was
No, I was 40 years.
40,
Yeah.
okay. So that's what I can imagine that's quite difficult as well because obviously it's 40 years of living the way you've been living and then to be hit with type 1, I can imagine that was quite a difficult transition.
Well, not really, because I'm a very positive person. I mean, I was an ex-international cyclist before being diagnosed. So we had dietitians and all these sort of things. So the transition for me was very, very simple. Um, and because I did the home testing kit on the Monday and I didn't go to the doctors till the Thursday, it gave me a few days to do a bit of research on type 1 diabetes. And I knew it was something that was controllable if you
Mhm.
were willing to take it by the balls and
Yeah.
control it, basically.
Okay, fair enough. That's that. I mean, that's the that's the only way to look at it. Really, it's one of those things you've just got to get on with, isn't it? So yeah, I mean that's a good approach, I'd say.
I class myself as a very lucky type 1 diabetic because I didn't have to go through teenage years and childhood and university and all these things. I had the ex international cyclist racing all over the world before I was diagnosed. So that's how. And also, when I was diagnosed, technology's come on so much
Mhm.
from if I was maybe diagnosed when I was a youngster. So yeah, I class myself as a lucky type 1 in
I
that
guess
way.
so. Yeah, that's a. I didn't really think of that, but I guess that is very true. It's a bit like when we had Pete on last week. He was saying when he was diagnosed, it was like big syringes like this, and they was carrying the insulin about in like a little like a little metal case and stuff. So yeah, I mean that's a again a great way of looking at it, I think. Okay. So what was it? Let's speak a little bit about your cycling days, because I'm a cyclist, so that's something I'm definitely keen to hear more about. Tell us a little bit about that. So that was pre diabetes.
Yes, it was. Yeah. So I've raced for Great Britain on a few occasions. I rode the 1994 Commonwealth Games for Scotland, where I finished ninth in the road race.
Oh wow.
I broke Graham O'Brien's Scottish 1 hour record, covering just under 30 miles in an hour.
Nice.
In Meadowbank Velodrome. And as I say, I've raced all over the world, as far afield as South Africa, Canada, Saudi. So yeah, there's not many places I haven't seen.
I like how you said that very casually. You've broken Graham O'Brien's record. I don't think he's Graham anymore, is he? I think he's like he's a lady, I think now. But anyway,
That's Robert Miller.
no, it's Robert Mills.
Yes.
He is a Scotsman, though, isn't he?
He's the Scotsman. He was the King of the Mountains in the Tour de France, whereas Graham O'Brien was the time trialist.
He was the one with the washing machine, wasn't he? The bike from the washing machine.
That's the one. Yep.
My dad's actually on the course. I remember there's a VHS he used to have, and it was the Chris Boardman vs Graham O'Brien. I've watched that. I was watched that so many times as a kid, and I've got that fun.
Yep.
Graham O'Brien brought in this bike with the like sort of the funny position, which is just mental. But
yeah, I've raced away with Scotland with Graham O'Brien, and he's quite an eccentric character. Let's just say that.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, I mean, to build a bike out of a washing machine, I think you've got to be a little bit. That's interesting.
It was taken a bit out of hand with the washing machine. It was just a bearing that came out of the washing machine that you used for the bottom bracket, which is between your pedals.
Yeah,
that's the only part he used. But it's a good story.
Yeah, it is a good story. Definitely. Okay, cool. All right, and so what did you, as your diagnosis? Diabetes management changed from diagnosis to now? Is it the same? Like, what are you doing? And
before I went to the Marathon de Sable in 2013, Dexcom contacted me and they made me a Dexcom warrior. So I now get the opportunity. I've been using Dexcom ever since. Apart from that, in 2012, I went on an insulin pump. I went on an Animas 5, which is no longer because Animas pulled out of diabetes management. In fact, Johnson & Johnson, who owned Animas, pulled out.
Yes. Yeah.
So I am now on a Ypsomed pump.
Okay. Cool. And you've always been, have you been on pens or no? It's always been a pump?
No, I was on pens from 2008 till 2012. Multi-daily injections.
Yeah, okay. And what did you, I assume you obviously prefer the pump?
Oh, it's a game changer.
Yeah.
An absolute game changer, yeah.
Cool, okay. Right, so I don't really know where to start because there's lots to cover in terms of what you've done, but let's cover some of the stuff you've done, starting with the picture where you're running what looks like across the moon with the boots would be a good start.
Okay, that was the Marathon de Sable. When I was diagnosed with type 1, I knew absolutely hee-haw about the condition. And that really embarrassed me because I'd raced all over the world. And I thought, if I know hee-haw about the condition, the chances are the majority of folk in the street know nothing about the condition. So I decided to do something to raise awareness. So I'd heard of a race called the Marathon de Sable, which is a 154-mile ultra marathon through the Moroccan Sahara Desert. And leading up to doing the Marathon de Sable, I raised over £30,000 for JDRF and Diabetes UK as well.
Wow.
So it's classed as one of the toughest foot races in the world. And as I say, the reason I did it was to raise awareness for type 1 diabetes. And apart from insulin crystallizing in my pump, everything apart from that seemed to go okay, and I finished it. First type 1 diabetic to finish it.
Wow.
Excuse me.
So the crystallization, was that from the heat, I assume, was it?
It was, yeah, because the day of the longest stage was 48 mile.
Right, okay.
It was 52 degrees for a couple hours that day, so it was pretty hot.
Wow. So what did your sort of training leading up to that look like? Like, how do you sort of prepare yourself for that sort of event?
Okay, so I just did lots of long runs, but I also travelled from Inverness out to Edinburgh,
Yeah.
to Napier University,
Okay.
quite a few times to go into their climatic chamber to acclimatise for the heat.
Right.
So you can acclimatise for heat, but you can't acclimatise for cold. So I was just going into the climatic chamber and running on a treadmill at high temperatures to acclimatise.
Right. I was gonna say because yeah, you probably struggle with the temperature up in Inverness.
Yes. Well, it was -4 this morning.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So it's yeah, a little bit off of 52 degrees for sure.
Yeah.
And so the event itself, how long did that take you to complete? So 150 something miles, was it? You said?
Yeah, well, you've got 6 days to do it, but most folk do it in 5 days, which is what I did it in. So most stages are around about a normal marathon distance, but the longest stage was 48 miles.
Right. That's yeah, that's pretty incredible. And so sort of any other challenges through the event? Like what was the fueling strategy? Did you sort of have any problems apart from the crystallization with like diabetes management or anything like that?
No, before I went, you have to set out. You have to have so many calories each day.
Yep.
So I was having very simple food. I was having muesli in the morning with added macadamia nuts, raisins, and dried milk, and I was just adding a cold water to it, mixing it.
Yep.
And then at night I would do the same, but it would be with the porridge
Right.
and crushed macadamia nuts and raisins. So and it seemed to work. I was taking in my water bottles that were attached to the front of me. I was taking high five drinks with added caffeine because with being type 1 diabetic, if I take energy drinks with added caffeine, the caffeine, the adrenaline off the caffeine puts your blood glucose level up.
Mm-hmm.
So it means you don't have to take so much fuel on board. So I was able to run without having to take so much carbohydrate on board.
And how many sort of gels was you going through per hour? Like just
I wasn't taking gels, it was a energy drink.
Oh, right, okay.
So
Powder stuff.
it was a powder stuff
Yep.
that had 47 grams of 47 grams of carbohydrate per sachet and 35 milligrams of caffeine. So
Right.
a big hit of caffeine each sachet.
Okay. And how many? Just to give us some idea, how many of that how many of those was you consuming during the run a day?
Probably 4 sachets.
Oh, right. So not like
But then on the other bottle, I would have isotonic drink with added caffeine as well.
Okay.
So I was alternating between the carbohydrate drink and the isotonic
Perfect.
drink.
Right. So, and this is this the one where you were saying you had like very little sleep?
No, that's a race that made the one in the Sahara look like a park track. That was a different kettle of fish altogether.
Right. Okay. Well, I think that's probably a good point to go into the Arctic race. Then let's talk through that one.
Okay, so in 2016, I felt I had this snowball effect, literally, of raising awareness of what could be achieved living with type 1 diabetes. So I'd already done the one in the heat, so the obvious was to find one in the cold.
Yes.
So I found a race called the 6633 Ultramarathon, which is from up in the Yukon in North Canada, from Eagle Plains to Tuktoyaktuk, on the Dempster Highway, which is where a lot of ice road truckers are filmed. But it wasn't 154 mile, it was 352 mile.
Right.
And you had 8 days to do it in. So in 2016, I entered it and went, and with about 70 mile to go, I failed and I pulled out because I was the only one in the race with a two-wheeled pulk. So what a pulk is a sledge with wheels. And I was the only one in the race that had a pulk with 2 wheels. Everyone else had 4 wheels. And I just had a waist harness, and most other folk had a full upper body harness. So my pulk bobbed, which gave me severe back trouble.
Right.
So when I pulled out in 2016 with about 70 miles to go, I'd made my mind up that providing I could convince Lynn, my wife, to go, then I would go back in 2017 and try and finish unfinished business.
And you did it.
So I'm back in our cycle shop in Inverness after the race.
Yeah.
And Lynn had a kitten, and she was told not to feed it wet cat food because it wasn't good for their teeth. So she had this wet cat food, and she was taking it to the rescue centre. So my phone goes at work, and it was Lynn, and answers the phone, and she goes, "Roddy." I'm like, oh, here we go. She goes, "There's this lovely little kitten. Can we have it?" And I'm like, right, here we go. I'll tell you what, you can have the kitten if I get to go back to the Arctic and try and finish unfinished business in 2017. And that's how it happened.
Love that.
So we've now got 2 cats.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. So you're...
That's not one of them, but that's an ornament above my head.
They say very still. So the bribe it. So I mean, that's an unusual sort of bribing technique, I must say. I don't think I've heard of anything like that. We get the kitten if I can do a 350-mile race across the Arctic. That's
It was just a spur of the moment. Take the opportunity.
amazing. That's amazing. And so when you went back, I assume you went with the four. I can't remember what you called it. The four-wheel thing.
Palk. It's basically a sledge with wheels.
Right.
So I went back in 2017 with a 4-wheel Palk and finished it. And I finished in 2nd place, and I've got the 6th fastest time in the history of the race.
2nd place overall.
Yeah.
Wow, incredible. And what was in the sledge? All the insulin, was it, or
just you're self-sufficient? So you've got to carry all your food. You've got to carry, because when the wind really gets high with the wind chill, and when the darkness comes down, it can get as cold as almost -50. So it's very opposite from where I was in the Sahara. So you've got to carry, like I was wearing 3 pairs of gloves, and one of the pair of gloves was big down mitts on the outside. That's one thing I didn't tell you about the race was when I finished the race, the year I finished the race with about 120 miles to go, my phone decided it didn't like the cold, which meant I had no CGM. Not a problem, because in my Palk I had my blood glucose meter. So I got my blood glucose meter out, took the test tube strips out, took a test tube strip, put it in the monitor, and it came up and said that it couldn't read the test strips, so they were cold. So for the last 120 miles of the race, I was having to take the test tube strips out 20 minutes before I was going to do a test, put them down my private parts to warm them up, to get them up to a temperature that they could read, so that I knew I was still in a safe place to continue with my blood glucose levels being in a good place.
That sounds it sounds pretty epic. And that so you was camping as well. You was running and then camping where you fell over, I guess, or
there was checkpoints. The checkpoints were anything from 28 mile. I think the longest one was 60 mile.
Right.
So the checkpoints generally had maybe a school hall or something like that.
Right. Okay.
But if you wanted to sleep in between that, you just got in a bivy bag at the side of the road.
Yeah.
And you had a flashing rear LED light at the back of your Palk, so you left that on just in case, to make sure an ice road trucker basically didn't run you over.
Wow, that's incredible. I mean, that's and 2nd overall. That's I mean, you must have been over the moon with that. It's a real achievement.
Yeah, I was absolutely delighted. I was actually delighted just to finish it, because when I pulled out in 2016, I felt I'd let myself down. I felt I'd let my friends and family down, but more importantly, because I had folk following me from all over the world, I felt I'd let the worldwide diabetes community down. So when I went in 2017, I wasn't coming back without finishing it. It wasn't an option not to finish it for me.
Incredible. And okay, that's amazing. And what other mad things have you done?
I tried to give myself a goal. Well, this is pre-COVID. I tried to give myself a goal every year. So the year after we did the Marathon de Sable, the people that I shared my bivouac with, which is basically your tent at night, we decided we would have a reunion.
Mm-hmm.
Normally, when you have a reunion, you go down to the pub, have a bar meal and a few beers. But no, we don't do things that easy. So we decided we would run a race called the Highland Fling, which is up the West Highland Way from Milngavie to Tyndrum, over 53 miles. So I'm running it with one of the guys that we did the Marathon Sables with. And 18 miles in, I felt something loose in my stomach. And it was my cannula had ripped off from insulin pump. So I'm like, right, okay, what am I going to do? There's still 35 miles of this race to do. So I decided I would run the last 35 miles solely on water, just keeping an eye on my CGM arrows. So if I see my CGM dropping down, I would put in a short, intense sprint, which releases glycogen from the liver. And if I seen my glucose go up, I would just take my foot off the gas a wee bit. And I finished the race, and when I finished it and downloaded my CGM, I basically ran the 53 miles almost within a person with type 1 diabetes. It was almost a straight line.
Yeah.
But again, I was having to make it up as I went along because nobody had done these sort of things with type 1 before. So that was 2014. So I did a 72-mile one from Fort William to Inverness, which is my hometown, off-road. And I finished third in that one. So yeah, I've done some silly things.
I can imagine you must have had some big spike after that one with obviously no insulin on board and then some rocket ship.
Yeah, I phoned my diabetic specialist nurse, Lorna, and she was so concerned about me because you can see when I was running, as soon as I stopped at 4 o'clock, when you see the CGM graph, it just goes like that.
Yeah, yeah.
I did have spare cannulas in my kit bag, but my kit bag was at the finish line, so got a cannula on and got some insulin on board, and eventually it did get under control again.
Awesome. Okay, so have you got anything in the pipeline? Sort of anything coming up, or
not really? No, because like since the pandemic, we've really lost 4 years of these sort of races because like the race I did in the Arctic hasn't been run just because of the pandemic. It is being run again this year, but I'm too old for these things now.
I'm sure you'd be all right. You sound like you're a pretty mean machine. No, cool. I thought that was amazing. I really enjoyed that. I'm sure we've got plenty of questions in the audience. So what we'll do, Roddy, is we'll open it up to the floor and people can ask you some questions. So,
okay. One thing I will say is the entries for the one in the Arctic, the 352-mile one, are open for anyone that wants to do it.
Don't all put your hands up at once now. Right, come on then. Let's have some questions for Roddy. Henry, go on.
Yeah, thanks for sharing kind of some of your story so far. I just had a couple of questions. So I think my first one is probably about the practicalities of being in the Arctic and managing diabetes. We heard on a previous week from a sailor who kind of talked about the practicalities of delivering insulin with meals, etc. And kind of he opted to go for insulin pens. Excuse me. He opted to go for insulin pens rather than a pump because of just dexterity and things like that. So, kind of during the Arctic, what pump was it you had, and how do you find actually the physical nature of kind of delivering insulin and stuff with thick gloves on? And
I didn't deliver insulin the whole time I was there. I survived solely on basal.
Okay.
Because I averaged 56 mile a day for the period. So the exercise that I was doing was covering what the bolus would do. So what I did was, before I went to the Arctic, I had a lycra belt made that was next to my skin. So my insulin pump was in that lycra belt underneath quite a number of layers of clothing. So the pump didn't really have any major problems, but when I went to fill my pump up, when I went into my pulp to get the backup insulin, the insulin was completely frozen. So I had to get my flasks out of the pulp, defrost the insulin, so I could get the insulin into the pump. I've since found out that you're not supposed to have used insulin that's been frozen, but well, I'm still here, so it can't be that bad.
That's my logic on insulin, and I'm not advising anyone else to follow this technique. But I had an insulin. Yes, no. In fact, it was I had a glucagon pen, and my partner's a diabetes specialist nurse, and she was saying, "Oh, this should definitely be in the fridge. Should definitely be in the fridge." And I was like, "Well, it might not be sterile, it might be out of date, but it'll be fine. Like in the grand scheme of things, it might not be as good, but I might get an infection, but it's probably going to cure me from the drastic hypo I'm having. So we'll keep it on the bedside table." So yeah, I'm definitely in that similar thing. You answered my next question, which was going to be, how did you physically stop your insulin freezing, but sticking it on the you halfway managed there by sticking it on the skin.
The pump was next to my skin all the time. Yeah. In hindsight, I probably should have had my backup insulin the same place, but I had it in the pulp, which was a bit more exposed to the extremes.
I guess it's the balance there of, whenever I travel, I always think about splitting my insulin supplies out so that if something happens to me or happens to my rucksack, I've got it in my suitcase. In a similar sort of way, you were balancing, if you had a trip and a fall and landed, you don't want to smash all your spare insulins. So actually keeping them separate, it's quite a good idea.
Yeah. So yeah, as I say, I was having to make it up as I went along, like when the CGM packed in. Well, it wasn't the CGM, it was my phone packed in. I was just having, like when you put your test strip into the meter and it says it can't read it, it's like, how am I going to find out what my glucose levels are? You've got 3 pairs of gloves on, trying to get blood out your fingers in these temperatures. It's not easy.
You're there sucking the finger to try and warm it up or something like that.
Yeah.
But I can imagine that'd be pretty difficult. I always find, I don't know whether you find this, but I always find whilst I'm exercising that my hypo-awareness or hyper-awareness is more difficult. And particularly if I'm going low, I sometimes confuse kind of an adrenaline response with feeling low and going, am I low or am I just having an adrenaline response because of a spike or something like that? So I think that, personally for me, I don't know whether you feel the same, but I find it harder to judge it by touch and feel in those sorts of situations as well, where you're out of your comfort zones.
During the 663, the 352 mile, I only had one hypo throughout the whole race, and it was at the first checkpoint. And the reason it was at the first checkpoint is it was the shortest checkpoint, and I had a normal breakfast that day and took insulin on board, and that's why I had a hypo at the first checkpoint. Apart from that, because I didn't bolus after that, I didn't have a single hypo throughout the race.
So then, just flicking over to the Marathon des Sables, because there's a comment in here about about your insulin in the chat that I'm just reading, which was, what did you do about the crystallized insulin on the Marathon des Sables? And did you have any kind of occlusions in the pump as a result? And
no, I basically try to cover all eventualities. So I do what you were saying you do when you go abroad and stuff. You split your insulin up. So I got in touch with the organisation before I went and told them that I was type 1 diabetic. You're supposed to be self-sufficient, but the organisation, when I explained about backup insulin supposed to be kept in a fridge and stuff, they said if I give them a vial of insulin, they will put it with all the catering stuff for the staff that work on the race. So it was put in a fridge. So if I had an issue, I'd just get in touch with the organiser. He would go to the catering and I would get the backup insulin.
Okay. And how far was it between noticing that your insulin started to crystallise and managing to actually get hold of that spare supply in desert conditions?
Not till I got to the stage finish. It was only because my CGM was just continually going up, and it wasn't until I actually got to the finish, took the insulin out and seen that it had completely crystallised, that I seen what the problem was.
I've clearly never ridden or exercised in hot enough conditions, because I've never seen mine crystallise with heat before. I've seen Lantus used to freeze in my fridge when my fridge was too cold a little bit and go a bit cloudy, but I'll have to leave some out in the sun at some point. And then just
Yeah, go on, Henry.
I was just going to ask about the you obviously mentioned early in your life you were or earlier in your life I should say an international cyclist. You talked a little bit about that, but I just wondered whether that's something you still do regularly, or have you switched over to the dark side?
No, I haven't. No, I got myself a gravel bike early COVID, and I go out on that most weekends when it's not snow or ice up here. So no, I still enjoy riding the bike.
There's a spare ticket for a tap block Nesco in our group if you fancy it.
I'm a mechanic.
You're a mechanic?
Yeah, I do the checkpoint. I do the mechanic in at Whitebridge, which is the last mechanic station on the route.
Is that the one by the kind of white what looks like it should be a white pub after the climb?
Yes, that's it. Yes, I'm in there on the left hand side.
Oh, I know it well. That's where I got my first ever mac and cheese pie.
Yeah.
Was from there.
That's a good friend of mine owns that bakery, Harry Gow.
Oh, every year I look back from 8 years ago. Keep on going back from. That always happens. So.
Yeah. Oh, you can't beat a macaroni pie.
I'll come and say hello. But that's it for my questions. Sorry, Ed.
Cool.
That's all right. Over there a bit. That was good. I enjoyed that. Was good. Right. Is there any more questions? Unmute yourself if you want to. Okay. Well, there's a question here in the chat from GK Cycles, which is my dad. Any trouble with bears in Canada?
No, because they're hibernating.
Right.
But one thing that one of the organisers came up to me. He was in the 4-wheel drive vehicle, and he came up and he goes, "You're not going to believe it, Roddy, but just round the corner, there's a moose having its lunch." So there was a moose that killed something, and it was having it. Now, I'd heard that moose were really, really aggressive animals, and I just started really pooping myself, thinking, I'm going to go round this corner, and there's just going to be this moose going to be raging and charging at me. But luckily for me, it finished its lunch and taken off.
Didn't want any Roddy for lunch. That's good.
No.
You've completely educated me here, because I thought that moose were carnivore, not carnivores. Were vegetarian.
They possibly are. They possibly are. He just said they were having their lunch, but I believe they're very aggressive.
Ooh. Right. Have we got any more questions?
One from me, Roddy. Good to see you again. I'm thinking about doing MDS, Marathon des Sables, maybe next year, maybe the year after. Is it all right if I come to you and get some tips and advice?
Absolutely no problem. Yeah. And I've probably got some kit that you could have as well.
Thank you.
Because I don't plan going back. That box is ticked.
Well, a friend of mine's doing it this year, and she's being coached to do it, so I'm doing a few hikes with her, so I'm getting used to it. But she asked me if I wanted to do it a couple of months ago, and I said, maybe next year or the year after. I think I just need a bit more training for it.
Yeah, no, just get in touch, and I can share my spreadsheet with the food that I used and stuff like that. Because as I say, you've got to have a minimum, I think it was 3,000 calories a day, and I had something like 3,025, and it worked a treat.
Perfect, great. Thank you.
Good luck with that, Simon, by the way.
Yeah, cheers.
Is there any more questions? Can't see it. Is there no one's put the hand up, have they? Okay, speak now, forever hold your peace. Okay. Well, Roddy, I've really enjoyed that. Thank you very much for an insight into some of the incredible things that you've done. You really are a true inspiration, certainly for me anyway, and I'm sure for everyone on the line. Really appreciate your time. And we'd love to have you back at some point.
No problem. And the reason I do these silly things is to prove to people, especially, I go into schools and do presentations, and when there's children there with type 1 diabetes and they've seen what I've done living with type 1, it just puts them a massive smile on their face, and if it makes them realise it shouldn't stop them achieving their dreams and goals in life, it makes all the hard training and stuff worthwhile.
That's amazing. That's the best gift of all, isn't it? So, no, amazing. Well done, mate.
Thank you very much.
Cheers,
Thanks very much for having me.
Cheers, everyone.
Thanks, Roddy.
Thanks, Roddy.
Thank you. See ya.
Yeah.